Okay, Chair, ready to go?
Sorry, I am back. That was my internet then as well. So I think we're ready to start, are we?
That's correct, Chair.
Wonderful. So welcome and to everybody, councillors, officers and members of the public who are viewing on YouTube. This is the meeting of the Climate Emergency Sustainable Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. My name is Councillor Karen Walker and I chair this panel. I will now call out the names of the members on the panel. And if you can just say that you're present, please. So Councillor Tom Davis.
Present.
Alison Bourne.
Present.
Shelley Bromley.
Present.
Sue Craig.
Present.
Joel Hurst.
Present.
Lisa O'Brien. Lisa.
Sorry, present.
Lovely. Grant Johnson.
Yep, present.
And Dr. Kumar.
Present. Thank you.
So for members of the public, just to let you know that we will have a couple of other councillors with us today, and we've got Councillor Sarah Warren, who's Cabinet Member for Climate and Emergency. And we also have presentations from David Trithuey and Linda Dean. So David Trithuey is the Director of Partnership and Corporate Services, and Linda Dean is Senior Manager for reopening the High Street and renewing the High Street. And we'll also have presentations from Chris Major, who is Assistant Director of Highways Transport. And we also have Michaela Gay, who's Democratic Services, who will be taking notes for this meeting. So, right, so I can just remind councillors, members on the panel, to keep your noise to a minimum in the background. I have a fan on, so you may hear that, so I do apologise. One
We can't hear anything, I understand.
Have we just lost Karen?
Yeah.
Shall I, let's, sorry, it's Tom here. Let's give her 20 seconds, see if she can come back on. She was saying her internet's not brilliant.
That's what I mean about meeting in for real. Saves all this problem.
Yeah.
I do apologise. One day you want your Wi-Fi to work correctly and it lets you down. So just to remind people to mute their microphones when not speaking. And if you wish to speak, please use the chat function and say, MIS, may I speak? If a member of the panel is going to leave the meeting, please just let me know by that same function in the chat room. And then when you return again, just let me know that you've returned to the meeting. So I don't believe we have any votes today, but if we do have to take a vote, and I will call your names out alphabetically.
Karen's gone out again. Tom, the next, I've just written the chair's introduction, and the next bit on it was, does anybody have any questions? And then we were going into apologies. I'll just let you know that before.
Sorry.
Oh, here she is.
So does anybody have any questions? Lovely. Okay, so we have apologies for absence, Michaela?
No, none.
Shall I move us on to declarations of interest?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any members have any declarations of interest at this stage to declare?
No, thank you.
I will take that as none. Michaela, any urgent business that I needed to announce?
No, none.
No. And any items from the public or councillors? Any statements, petitions, or questions?
Yes, we have.
I see.
We have a statement from. We have three. We have David Redgewell, Keris Humphreys, and Councillor Amanda Rigby. So you could start with David Redgewell if he is here. Is he here?
Is David there?
Is David
Just-
Redgewell here? I believe Keris Humphreys is here, so she could go first. Is that okay, Keris?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Great. Okay. Apologise in advance. This is very Bath centric. So my statement relates to the LTN strategy draft that you're considering today. And I'm speaking for Pulteney Estate Residents Association. We support the LTN concept and we're very pleased to see progress. We see potential benefits in our area and elsewhere. I want to share concerns on a lack of thought around main roads in Bath. Main roads here raise challenges that don't arise in other places. So more work's needed on solutions before making changes that'll displace traffic onto them. The draft strategy assumes that main roads are designed to take larger amounts of traffic, that's stated. That's not true in Bath. Main roads are often streets that are originally built to take horses and carriages, and they're lined by terraces close to the roadside, which retain pollution and noise. It's also implied in the draft a small increase in traffic on a main road is not noticeable or problematic, and that's highly questionable. Several of Bath's main roads are close to or exceeding pollution limits. The CAS should address exceedance in the CAS itself, but the modelling shows some main road locations outside the CAS will stay illegal for the foreseeable future. And post-COVID car use is projected to increase car traffic. And congestion on main roads in Bath is already at very high levels under normal circumstances. The strategy says only 9% of HGV traffic is through traffic. That's manifestly incorrect. The vast majority of HGVs that come into Bath along the London Road or Warminster Road are through traffic, simply connecting to the other end. And 1,000 HGVs a day use that route. That's not all delivering to Bath. So there's no headroom for increases in emissions or increasing traffic on the main roads in Bath. There is a solution. The temporary weight limit on Cleveland Bridge from February didn't just reduce congestion on London Road, but had a knock-on effect across large parts of Eastern Bath and into the city centre. There are alternative routes for through traffic, which lack many of the problems of the A36, A46 route. Unless that change can be made permanent, HGV traffic will just return as LTNs are implemented, reinstating congestion that will undermine the improvements made. We know the council is talking to Wiltshire, but that's gone on for decades. The time for a permanent solution is now and would make a huge contribution to the success of LTNs. We also advocate a joined up approach on the other policies you're looking at today. On EV charging, for example, more points at park and rides with few as possible in the central part of the city will reduce the draw effect of people driving into Bath so that they can charge their cars. And the parking policy needs to address excessive allocation of permits to accommodation operators, which is inconsistent with the council's policy on sustainable transport. So to conclude, a review of the data, especially on the main roads, is essential as it seems incorrect and has the potential to undermine the plan. And a clear master plan, a clear strategy is needed to reduce traffic on the main roads and provide the necessary headroom to make the changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall I assume I continue to chair unless I get a message from Karen? Is that best? Okay, do you think?
Yeah, okay, and I can help you because I've got the chair's note. I think we now have David Redgewell present, unless anybody had any factual questions for Keris.
No, it sounds. No, thank you very much, Keris.
If not, then we can go on to David Redgewell, who I believe is now present.
Hello?
David, are you there, David Redgewell?
I'm here, but I can't get the video to start.
Okay, we can hear you if you want to make your statement.
Okay, all right. Just to add to my points about the sub-region, really. Obviously, Bath's at the centre of what is known as the Western Gateway Transport Plan, which is out for consultation at the moment. I'm not sure there's a very good climate change emergency strategy within that plan. The Baines is one of the councils that takes part with WECA, along with the neighbouring Wiltshire, of course, and with Dorset and Gloucestershire. So it's a surrounding area to Bath. Bath has to be very clearly inside that plan. We are still concerned about the level of reliance on the private car and the level of road building in that particular plan, and therefore is probably not in league with the kind of climate change public transport policies that the city and its environs want to see. So my first point would obviously be to ask the committee to look at that plan, and the executive member, in this case, Neil Butters, and also the mayor, of course, the Metro Mayor, will have to make a submission on that particular plan by the 31st of this month. Some concerns we have are about the ability to improve the public transport into West Wiltshire, which obviously is very important to the city of Bath, and also into North Somerset. But the point about Mendip is not inside Western Gateway, which is to us rather ridiculous, because obviously you have the traffic that comes in from Wells, Glastonbury Street, Frome, Shepton Mallet, that area into the city, and therefore is totally missed off the plan itself. On the issue of the services within Baines itself, public transport-wise, which of course are no longer the responsibility of this authority, but now the responsibility of the West of England Combined Authority from the 1st of April, we would like to see more done by the Mayor in conjunction with Baines to improve the bus services, both in the city itself and particularly out to the more rural areas such as Radstock, Midsummer, Norton, and particularly at the moment, we still only have about 80% of the services with COVID-19. So we don't have a complete public transport network, and at weekends, it becomes very sparse. So just one example of that is we don't have a bus service at the moment at weekends between Radstock and Midsummer, Norton and Bristol, which seems rather bizarre in the sense that obviously that's part of a major part of the conurbation. We think in the whole, there's still a lot more to do inside the city on coaches and coach parking. I'm not sure that's yet properly been addressed. And I'm not sure I've really seen the conversion by the WECA Mayor of the bus fleet in the way we've seen in Bristol towards hydrogen gas. And therefore would be very keen to see more work on electric buses, gas buses, and of course more work on Metro West in improving the rail services towards Westbury. So just really asking for the WECA plan, the Baines climate change plan, and now the Western Gateway transport plan to all be joined up so that we look at the climate change aspects of this plan, Chair. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have
Thank
any
you.
questions for David? Oh, sorry, Tom.
No, Karen, good to see you back. I'll
Sorry,
hand back to
really
you.
sorry about that. The one day you really want everything to work properly. So thank you, Tom, for taking over while I disappeared. So any questions for David? I don't think so. So thank you, David, for giving us your statement. And I'm really sorry that I've missed it, but I did manage to read it earlier on today. Thank you. So we now have Keris Humphreys that wishes to make a statement.
Keris spoke just before David, so we can go on to Councillor Rigby.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for allowing me to come and speak to you. I'll try not to repeat some of the things that have been said before, but apologies in advance if I do. The reason I registered to speak was I was really, really interested, and in fact I was delighted to see the large paper that came on livable neighbourhoods, because I think we really need to get behind this and get on with delivering what it is obvious that a lot of our communities want. And splitting them into the three, the low traffic neighbourhoods, resident parking zones and the electric charging. I'll talk very briefly about a few points on each, if I may. Within the low traffic neighbourhoods, I think the only point that I'd like to make on top of what's already been made by Keris, and I'm sure will come up in your debate, is a lot of the stuff that Jacobs wrote was pre-COVID. So what we're saying about encouraging more and more people to go onto public transport, what we were saying about absolutely what we want to do is have low traffic neighbourhoods, but bring the level of traffic down overall as well. I think it'd be quite good if, as part of, not holding up anything, but as part of the ongoing work, we looked at what difference we think it will happen, and we have to do some modelling about how many people will end up going back into their private cars because currently they are too scared to go onto public transport. So I urge you to add that into your thought process. In terms of resident parking zones, my concerns are that a lot of people are very excited about the prospect of these being delivered soon. So I'd love to see that as part of this work, we carry on delivering with the things that are on the way to being delivered. And I think Kerry's touched on one area that hasn't been mentioned, but certainly is very important in my ward in Bathwick, that a lot of the hotels and guest houses have built over their car parks, so they've got more lettable rooms, and have now applied and got lots and lots and lots, and in some cases over 50 guest parking permits for their own property. This, of course, has two knock-on effects. It makes it terribly hard for the residents to park, and also we're tempting people to drive into the centre of Bath and park there. So perhaps that could be something else that could be looked at as you're going forward. Final point is on electric charging. I don't think Bath is configured in a way that makes it easy. So I read the document, and it itself admits that there's quite a lot more work that needs to be done. The one thing that I'd like to throw into the mix as well is with my chair of licensing hat on, I increasingly are getting taxi drivers coming to me who want to upgrade their car and would love to be able to upgrade it to an electric car, which we of course would love them to do because that would be the right thing to do. And this is throughout Bath and North East Somerset. However, they can't do that if they don't have enough charging points to make it possible for them to ply their trade and then charge quickly in between. Because if they're working all day, they are going to need to have charging in between some of their drop-offs. So thank you again for your time. I hope I've given you some additional things to think about. More than happy to ask any factual questions if there are, and then I'm going to be dodging over to YouTube so I can watch the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Amanda, does anybody have any questions? Or Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rigby, I'd just like to pick up on the comments you made about hotels having parking bays. Does this suggest that you don't want to encourage visitors to those hotels, which of course are vital for the livelihoods of many Bath residents? Many of those visitors to the hotel will presumably be going on elsewhere and therefore will need their car to travel around the country, etc. So could you clarify why you don't feel hotels should have any of these permits, please?
Yes, it was, I did actually say permits, not bays. When you first answered, it's bays. I'm not talking about parking bays, I'm talking about parking permits. Yeah. I think I didn't say we shouldn't have any. What I did say is we need to look at a policy that is fairer than it currently is, because at the moment, the policy appears to be that they get one parking permit per bedroom, where if you are a 5-bedroom house on Great Pulteney Street, you only get one permit. So the volume of permits that is coming through is unbalanced in favour of the guest houses and the hotels and against the residents. In no way am I trying to say I don't want people to come back and use them. A lot of Bathwick is very, very walkable from the train station, And also some of the guest houses have done something where people park up at the park, they drop their bags off, but then can park up at the park and ride. That doesn't get rid of the fact that they've had to do the journey, so it's created some pollution, but it does get rid of the fact that the competition for car parking in the centre is really high, and people can spend half an hour driving around the streets trying to find somewhere to park, and that's obviously very inefficient and very polluting.
Thank you, Amanda. I don't think there's anybody else. No. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Amanda. And yes, get back quick, get on YouTube and you can finish watching us. Lovely. So minutes of the 16th of March. Do I have a proposer that they are correct or any comments on them? Lisa, are you proposing that they are correct?
Yeah, thank
Lovely.
you.
And do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Tom. That's lovely. So we're now moving on to the overview of the renewal programme Workstream. So I'm going to invite David Trethui and Linda Dean to do a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Chair. Thank you. For those who don't know, I'm David Trethui, I'm Director of Partnerships Corporate Services. We're going to do a presentation in a minute, but just to give a bit of context, we're going to focus primarily in this session on one of the work streams around the reopening of the high street. So clearly that will also then link on, and Chris, who's on the call, may be able to, maybe some questions you have around the transport assets, Chris can pick up as well. So I will try and share the presentation on the screen now. My Wi-Fi is... Aha. There we go. Okay, so as I said, Chair, we've created a, as we got going through the COVID period, we got to probably as we got to that milestone, as we started reporting to Council and Cabinet in May and June time around how we'd responded to COVID incident and the changes it made. We also then had to start thinking about, well, actually coming out of COVID, adapting to what COVID-19 has meant for us, how are we going to organise ourselves? How are we going to focus our efforts on the things that the place, our economy, our communities are going to need? So we've had to do some work at at relatively quick speed, and that work is now coming out into the public domain, both through this panel, but we've also got a series of webinars going on at the moment where we're talking about a number of the issues in relation to this board. In fact, there's one starting in about half an hour, and we also did things like the parish liaison meeting last week. So the kind of message is getting out there, but just for the board's context, in many respects, we've had to put some of this together at great speed. So what is it we want to try and focus our efforts on is what you see here in the outline, the approach. So these aren't necessarily all the outcomes that members, the council will ultimately want, because part of this work is trying to refine that and clarify it. But these are the things that we thought were immediate issues that we needed to start addressing in that period. So how do we get some sense of where we are, how people perceive us, what's going to be the issues around reopening the area, how are we going to work around our climate change opportunities, support the economic recovery, how do we skill people up? And that's skilling of people has obviously become a much bigger issue over the last few weeks as people have begun to see some of the unemployment effects of the incident. And then how do we build strong, resilient communities? And obviously we've learned an awful lot through the process around about how our communities function and what their needs are and how we can how we need to work on them. So we quickly needed to say, well, we need to get our organisation together, and this is very much at this stage been about officer organisation. So we haven't yet got into member governance and what the groups are. It's about how do we pull together the resources we've got to start getting some of these discussions into the public realm and into members as we are starting today. So as you can see on the pictures, my pre-haircut photograph on the picture here. John Wilkinson and I as directors were tasked by the chief executive with trying to pull together this program, focusing on what we could at that point see as the kind of what are the key issues facing us. Now, clearly, we're going to look at the reopening one in a minute, because at that time, you know, there were lots of announcements going about various bits of the economy being able to reopen on certain dates, and we had to be, you know, as ready as we could be by those dates. But alongside that, we also had to think about actually how are our communities, you know, adapting, how are our communities currently, and how do we help them thrive, and how do we learn from some of the great work we've done during COVID through things like the Compassionate Communities Hub with our partners, the third sector, with Virgin. How do we build on some of that for the future, because we know that things are going to be different in the future. And then thirdly, how do we actually capture what our vision for all of this is? So what is it we're trying to achieve in terms of all the work we do? Because we have to be really focused in that. And there's the chart kind of has them running alongside, but clearly we need to, they talk to each other, and we've organised it so that there are colleagues within the services who are now leading on these work streams. Linda, you're going to speak to in a minute, Linda Dean. Then we've got Claire Thorogood, who's the head of partnerships, who's running Resilient Communities work, leading that, and Jen Wildblood, who's the climate change manager, who is leading the work around the vision. And each of these work streams, we're beginning to work up what the program of activity for all of those is, how we engage, and where they're going to go. So at various points, each of these work streams will want to come to this and the other panels with how that's developing and have some conversations. But as I said earlier, given the timings, we focus this presentation tonight primarily around the reopening aspects. Shall I stop there, Chair, for a moment if anyone wants to ask any questions before we move on to Linda for the reopening bit?
Yes, that would be lovely, David. So I have Joel first. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a good look at the paper over the weekend, and I thought it was a really helpful paper, and I particularly commend David and the officers for trying to get a pace around some of these important issues, because I think pace is really important and that we do need to urgently do some of this work. So I had three broad questions. The first was, which does stray into your member governance aspect that you kind of mentioned briefly. And I just wanted to kind of understand which cabinet lead this sits under, this program of work, and where it fits around cabinet members' responsibilities. The second was just a kind of and I recognise that the work is evolving quite quickly, but I guess my reflection on the paper was that there's not a lot around timelines, and so I was wondering whether there's going to be some work to try and tie down some key dates for deliverables around each of those work streams and kind of checking in points around that. The key thing that I wanted to kind of pick up on was actually the issue of, that was picked out in page 17 around the approach, and it was point 4, the rapid reskilling of people who have lost their jobs in the retail and tourism sector. And I guess I really strongly support that approach, but I didn't get a sense in the paper that that's been developed, that the thinking has been developed further forward. So I'm really keen for us to kind of try and push that on and to try and start to put some meat on the bone, really, of that idea about what is our focus going to be, how are we going to kind of make that happen, and how are we going to support those people who are going to be losing employment potentially, and finding a route through for them. And then my final point was really then on page 20 of the report, which is, let me just scoot down and find it, where you're setting out in Workstream 2 the bit about resilient communities. In point 8 of that section, you talk about the deficit for Bath of not having a forum. And I guess my request or comment is that I'm really keen that we push forward and find a solution for the lack of kind of engagement opportunities for the people, particularly in Bath, who don't have the opportunities that the forums that are available in North East Somerset. So those were my quick kind of questions and points and reflections. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Joel.
I guess the straightforward answer on where does the leadership of the programme sit, well, that with the leader and cabinet in that sense as the whole programme. Obviously, individual cabinet members will lead on aspects of each of the work streams, and at the moment we're working with them. So, for example, on the reopening one, at the moment, when Linda talks about it, that covers the agenda of Councillor Crossley, Councillor Wright and Butters, and the leader, and at various points also Councillor Ball. You know, if we've dealt with some of the licensing questions that come up. So at the moment we're developing it a little bit around, you know, who do we need to talk about what, and obviously when Councillor Warren's here, you know, we had a webinar last week on the renewal vision, and she led that with the leader. So, you know, I think we're developing that as we go, and as we start to, you know, currently the decisions and the accountabilities sit where they are, but I guess as we develop the programme, that governance will, you know, we'll develop, you know, different ways of helping them, you know, the cabinet members have greater oversight of what the work is. So I think it's a work in progress at the moment, but, you know, obviously the default position is where the accountability sits. Timelines equally, I think, yes. I mean, there are some in this presentation coming up in the moment around the reopening, and we are starting to build some of those around aspects of the other work. And when we bring each of those programs forward, we'll make sure that the various timescales are part of those presentations. Reskilling, absolutely important, and clearly, as I mentioned in my introduction, you know, clearly as a national issue, that kind of potential unemployment issue is growing pretty much by the day, isn't it? In terms of, you know, the impacts of different businesses closing parts of their operation or remodeling how they work, or whatever language they use to describe how they're dealing with the financial aspects. So we've picked that up, and one of the things we're working on at the moment is building a skills hub around the Commercial Communities Hub is going to kind of form into a wellbeing hub, and one of the hubs we build around that will be around skills, and we're already in quite discussions now with the colleges and other providers, and obviously linking that into, you know, our work with WECA around their funding. So I don't think we've you know, that's definitely coming, and obviously it's a future meeting. We could spend a bit more time on that as a particular. I haven't prepared to bring that today, but it's working. In terms of the governance, I think the other point around there's a general point around the resilient communities work is, and what we've learned through the period is obviously every area is different, and it's the same with the reopening. Every area is different. So I guess that all the paper reflects at the moment is we have existing you know, mechanisms to talk to different bits of the area, and currently there's a bit of a gap with Bath, which, you know, you've identified, and I guess will be a subject for further discussions.
Has that answered your questions, Joel?
Yeah, I think that's it's a good start. I'm conscious that there's an awful lot to do, and time is tight to get these things right. But yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. So I now have Shelley Bromley.
Hi, I think actually, sorry, Chair. I think a couple of my questions probably should be asked later on. In fact,
that's fine. That's fine.
Later, sorry, they're more related to what we're going to talk about later. So rather than jump the gun, maybe I better defer them a little bit. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. So Sue Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So one of my questions has been answered. You'd be glad to hear. The other one partly. So I just wanted to make a plea for keeping we elected members frequently and fully informed, because we really want to be involved and we really want to help. I'm sure it's safe to say that on behalf of everybody, but particularly in Bath, as Joel has mentioned, because we're not parished. We don't have that democratic representation of a parish council or whatever, so it's really important that the councillors within Bath are involved. And then finally, for each work stream, is there a contingency, or will there be a contingency plan in the case of further, I hope it doesn't happen, but further waves of COVID-19? Thank you.
In terms of engaging members, absolutely. And I think when Linda talks about the neighbourhoods programme in a moment, there's a specific example of where that that will come in. On the further outbreak, the council has an outbreak management action plan, which the Director of Public Health is accountable for, which has now gone, has been agreed. Clearly, we have the Director of Public Health on the officer board for this programme at the moment. So public health are keyed in at every level, because clearly we're very conscious of the need to keep aware of the potential of future outbreaks, but also that a lot of what we're doing in practical terms is around that safety and public safety issues. So public health are well built into this programme.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, David. So if I can introduce Linda Dean, Senior Manager for Reopening and Renewing the High Street.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to rely on my PA, David, to move the presentation on for me. For those of you that don't know me, and apologies, there's a few of you that I haven't met. My day job is the Senior Manager for Emergency Management, CCTV and events, outdoor events within the council. So obviously been really busy involved in the response phase, and we are still in some ways in a response, and so my emergency planning work still continues. And picking up on the final point with regards to further outbreaks, my team, although very small, is working with Bruce and the team on those local outbreak plans, and also how we manage concurrent events, major incidents. So not just related to COVID, it could be winter weather, it could be worse. So just to give a bit of context and assurance on that side. So John and David asked me if I would lead on the reopening of the high streets safely, and I think the idea of using me is that I have a breadth of knowledge across the authority. The work I do on both the outdoor events and emergency planning means that I have a good overview of all council services, and I work quite closely with a number of directors and senior managers. And we wanted to ensure that it was part of a broad approach rather than working in silos, that we all work together on supporting businesses to be able to reopen safely, what their challenges are, the challenges of actually reopening in some of our very narrow streets, and working with Chris Major's team in highways on the social distancing measures that we've put in place, and the balance between wanting to reopen the economy, but the danger of the influx of visitors that we went pre-COVID days, and the fact that we are still in a pandemic and social distancing rules still apply. So it's a very fine balance at the moment. So David, if you would mind just scrolling down, thank you. So quickly, oh, he's zoomed in. So I can't do this alone. So very quickly, I set up a project team that works with me. So we have a project lead around business and skills, public realm, transport and highways, visitor attractions, Visit Bath as our destination management company and the marketing of that. Our outdoor events and cultural events, they are key to starting to animate our spaces and make them more inviting at this time. And then it says the project lead North East Somerset is Dave Dixon. Since this slide was done, actually, I've now taken on Cleo Newcombe-Jones, which some of you will be aware of. Cleo previously worked in Mark Minkley's team, but Cleo has come to support me in this reopening work stream and works very closely with me on the reopening. So if you could move on. Thank you. So those of you, particularly within Bath City Centre and the local centres, will be aware that we have put in some social distancing measures on a number of streets. I fully appreciate and understand that they are not the most attractive social distancing measures that we could implement, but in the timescales afforded to us, it was the best solution. I think we have to recognise that the highways team were under enormous pressure to get these schemes in place for the reopening of our non-essential businesses on the 15th of June. I think we had literally 2 weeks. And we didn't or weren't able to do the full consultation that would normally be afforded with us to enable this to happen. On top of the pavement widening, we've also put in some access restrictions. And the access restrictions in particular on York Street, Cheap Street, Westgate Street and Upper Borough Walls, if I start with those first, were those areas that were, pre-COVID were our crowded spaces. Those areas where we get a lot of footfall. And because of the nature of the streets, we wanted to implement an access restriction on them to enable people to be able to queue into the highway. And Kingsmead Square, we brought on latterly, I think Kingsmead Square was last week or the week before. Milsom Street is in effect a bus gate, so it's buses only from 10 till 6. And Keynsham High Street, we went out, the highways team did go out to consult with all of the market towns actually, and Radstock and Midsummer Norton were content with what they had in place and didn't request any social distancing measures. Keynsham High Street, the town council voted to close it between 10 and 6 p.m. and that's all of these are for a trial period and all under a temporary road closure order. If you can move on for me, please. So these are the initial data figures. So on the 15th of June, 75% of those non-essential businesses that could be opened did open, and more are opening. And 60% of the licensed premises reopened on the 4th of July, again, with more due to open over this coming month. And the hotel industry is very similar, only a few opened and more are due to open, particularly those that have a spa or pool associated with them because of the rules on spas and swimming pools, obviously, from the government. The Holborn Museum opened on the 4th of July with the Roman baths on the 6th. And it has been decided that the Victoria Art Gallery and the Assembly Rooms will remain closed until March 2021. We are looking to open those the week leading up to Easter. Easter's very early this next year. I think it's the first weekend in April. So it will look like we will open up those facilities in time for Easter. Thank you, David. As part of the information that we sent out to those, particularly those premises directly affected by the access restrictions, we worked across with highways, with public realm, with comms, with public health, and ensuring our messages were very clear. And I have to say, overall, I don't think we've had too many issues. We're very conscious of some vehicles still accessing those areas. We do have stewards in place and we are hopeful they are on order, but within the next couple of weeks, we will actually have a physical barrier there would be a gate. It's called a gallows gate. A gallows gate will be going in on those roads so that people can't just move the bollards out of the way and get down those streets. As David said, there's actually a webinar at 5 o'clock this evening, but we have done a webinar, 2 webinars. One was led by the council prior to the opening on the 15th of June, and we did one in conjunction with the bid for prior to the licensed premises reopening. And also a bit of context on that, when the licensed premises were reopened, we also held a multi-agency meeting with the police, with British Transport Police, and the bid and other colleagues regarding that reopening. And it was a multi-agency response to, because we did have concerns that first weekend. Thankfully, they didn't materialise. But that's the model that we would use going forward if we had any concerns. There is a new planning and business bill. It gets its final reading, actually today. And that is in relation to pavement licenses, i.e. tables and chairs, and it relaxes the law for off sales. So we're hoping that gets royal assent by the end of July, and that previously, for those of you that may be aware, tables and chairs normally is a 28-day consultation, and in some instances planning consent is also required. The new pavement licenses, I think it's 7 days consultation, and planning consent is assumed rather than needing to be consented. So my colleagues in licensing are working hard on a new application process and working with premises, particularly those premises that want to introduce new tables and chairs outside of their premises that haven't done previously, particularly those smaller premises where indoor trading is difficult. I believe it was successful at informal cabinet state. We are starting our I Love Local campaign, very much supporting the public health messages, but pre-COVID. And actually, I think Joanna Wright summed it up perfectly at the pre-15th of June opening webinar that we did, but it's around supporting our local businesses, the great local businesses that we have, those businesses that we relied on in lockdown where we couldn't drive to places, the butcher, the baker, you know, those independent shops. And it's very much working with those smaller destinations rather than it being I Love Bath. It's about Widcombe, the Lark Halls, the Moorland Roads. It could be Broad Street, it could be Walcott Street, and Milsom Street in particular, but it's very much localised on those areas. And linked in with that, working with our business and skills team on how we can support those businesses, licensing in terms of how we can support pavement licenses. So we're trying to do it as a collective approach rather than individual teams being responsible for individual areas. So a bit of the time line. So if David, you can go up. Yep. I think that's it. So yeah, so the little time, sorry. So the other thing that we are doing is reviewing other funded programs to release the funding support to help the renewal agenda. And we want to look at it as a place recovery rather than individual streets. And Sue, picking up on your request, I think it would be useful if you and I and maybe Andy have either weekly or fortnightly meetings so that we can touch base with you on particularly what's happening in Bath as that moves forward. But we're looking at how we can release the money to support the Kingsmead Square programme that was already approved, but also potentially refocusing some of that money for Milsom Street. If you're in town, you will know that the bottom of town is actually quite busy, but everything seems to stop north of Russell and Bromley, and we need to address that. In conjunction with, we have a bit of money from the reopening of our High Streets Fund, And what we're looking at is developing future action plans for Midsummer Norton, Radstock, Keynsham and Bath. And this is about looking at the future of our high streets. What are our high streets going to look like post-COVID, but in the future? And as David said, you know, we have a high reliance on our tourism and retail sector. Do we need to think differently to that? We obviously continue to engage with our businesses through our business and skills team, but also our food team, our licensing team, our public health teams on how they can reopen safely. And as David said earlier, the business and skills pod that's being set up at the Compassionate Communities Hub to help those staff, not council staff, but across all sectors at risk of redundancy. And we're very conscious that we need to increase the focus in the North East Somerset area. And I'm pleased that we have managed to get that resource through. Caroline Lightfoot is also joining the Renewal team, along with Cleo and Dave Dixon. So we're all working together along with other colleagues on making that happen. And that's my little update. Any questions?
So thank you, Linda, and thank you to all your work colleagues who've worked so hard over the last few months to get all this back up and running so that we can use our high street. Just very quickly, I mean, you talk of vision and perceptions and place marketing, but will this bring back our visitors to our high street in Bath?
That's a really good point. And at the start of it, when we were looking at what marketing and what we should be doing around the reopening, and we spoke to Dina and other cabinet members, first and foremost, public safety was our top priority, is helping building confidence in our residents to be able to come back into certainly Bath city centre, to shop, to visit, to rediscover their city or to rediscover their surroundings, while still supporting that local independent baker or butcher that they had done for the last 3 months. And it wasn't about attracting an overseas visitor or even visitors from the northeast. You know, it was very much focused on our residents. As we move forward and as our accommodation sector reopens and working with Visit Bath, it's what is our offer? And again, I don't think we're that in a place yet where we certainly don't want at this stage coach operators coming back. The city isn't big enough to deal with the volume of tourists at this stage that we had previously, and we need to make sure we can maintain the social distancing, that the Roman Baths isn't overwhelmed with visitors, the Abbey isn't overwhelmed with visitors, and it is a really difficult balancing act because we're very conscious the economy needs to be kick-started, and a lot of our businesses rely on the tourism economy. But we really have to think about how we do that safely. So public health is our number one message.
So it's really a step by step, isn't it? Really, you know, baby steps until, you know, we're sure we're clear of the COVID-19 and we have got a vaccination in place as well. So I'm opening the floor up. So I've got Alison that wishes to ask a question.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Linda. That's a really interesting presentation. And it's great to hear how proactive the council's been and how responsible it's been in its strategy for opening up. I particularly like the I Love campaign, and the fact that it's been piloted in Widcombe is great, really good news. I think it will be, you know, really welcomed locally, and I'm sure it will help all the communities across Bath as it gets rolled out, so that's really good. Just one suggestion in relation to food outlets, people selling, you know, cafes and takeaways. Some of them will have space outside where they can have tables and chairs, but for the ones where it's not possible, I wonder if it might be possible to set up some more sort of central food court areas in the city where people can take their takeaway food and sit and eat it. And if we had signposts as to where those were, then that might support those businesses as well as the ones that are lucky enough to have room for people to eat either on the premises or immediately outside. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I can pick that one up. I'm trying, probably the end of June, I walked around the city with highways, with licensing, with planning, and we looked at where we could do exactly as you said. And, as you know as well as I do, Bath unfortunately doesn't have big open expanse areas that enable us to do that. Kingsmead Square, the funding that we have for Kingsmead Square, we hopefully, that will be released soon and we can start work on the Kingsmead Square area. But there were some streets where we would welcome pavement license applications, and we are working with those businesses to encourage. And the repurposing of some of the Love Our High Street money, particularly on Milsom Street, will hopefully enable us to put in they're the parklets. So they're little areas of benching and seating where people can sit and enjoy food. And we're also green spaces, encouraging people to go into our parks and open spaces. But it is a challenge. Got funding on one side and also the space to be able to do it. But be assured we are looking at all options.
So Alison, did Linda answer your question?
Yes, thanks. It's good to hear that that's been considered.
Lovely. All we have to do though is get rid of the seagulls so we can sit nicely in our parks and enjoy our sandwiches. So we'll move on. Tom.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Linda, thanks and David, thanks very much indeed. That was really, they were really informative presentations, and I just echo the thanks of others for all the work that's gone in. Linda, I guess this one's directly for you, and that is that, do we have any sense how well we are doing relative to other areas and similar cities in sort of attracting people back onto the high street, and are we sharing best practice collaboratively with other councils? I'm not sure what the sort of fora are for that at the moment.
So in terms of the footfall data, we only have footfall data for Bath, which the BID kindly, Bath Business Independent, Bath Improvement District, Business Improvement District share with us. And based on last week's data, the trend we're definitely going up. I understand we are above average for our comparator cities, so I think that that's a positive. The weekends in particular are busy in the city, and I was in Bath yesterday and I actually thought I was surprised at how busy the city was. Yes, we do compare with other towns and cities. As part of my role as in emergency planning, I sit on the local resilience forum, and that's across Avon and Somerset. So we talk to our counterparts in other local authorities, and we also, as part of the reopening of the High Streets Fund, we are invited to a webinar with them, and that's with other comparable, with other cities that have access to that funding, so we can find out what they're doing, where we can learn from, etc.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I have Lisa now.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, Linda. Thank you for the information that you've given. A couple of questions about the processes that you mentioned. When you showed the slide of different approaches to social distancing, and you identified a number of streets in Bath, which I know, which are very narrow, and have fairly heavy footfall. And you then also later on, you were commenting on Milson Street, and you said, yes, everything stops short of Russell and Bromley. I was in Milston Street early on, and I struggle to understand why you identify that it's already got an activity problem, in that a lot of people aren't shopping in Milston Street. The park and ride is too low down, etc., etc. It's got wide pavements, and yet you closed it completely apart from the bus. I also, because I'm a Keynsham councillor, would highlight too that Keynsham High Street, although it's the busiest part of the town, didn't qualify for the government guidelines that you had to have very heavy footfall. I was also interested to hear that officers had consulted with all market towns. I know that one of them certainly spoke to the ward councillors. There was a motion put forward at town council. I understand from reading the draft minutes that there was some misunderstanding about that, but that's a separate point. But I am surprised when you say there was consultation with the market towns, yet you didn't consult with the businesses concerned. You commented that the I Love Local campaign wants to support our great local businesses, and yet they weren't consulted at all in terms of the social distancing. And to me, that is an anachronism, because it's their livelihoods fundamentally that are risk. So I'd like some clarification on that. I also would like some more detail, if I may, coming back to the document that was produced. Under the revival, item 9, the recovery of tourism volumes will not happen in less than 3 to 5 years. I wonder whether that is just based on rough estimates, or whether any actual analytical substantive data has been done to come up with that, because clearly, as we've identified, the heritage services and the parking associated with it, but particularly the heritage services, form such an important part of our economy, not just in terms of income to the council, but obviously to those other retail businesses that you meant. Finally, I'm sorry, I have lots of questions. Finally, you mentioned that you're going to do a review of the funded programs, and I noticed in the appendices in terms of the went to cabinet, in terms of the regeneration of Keynsham High Street, where funding had already been obtained, not from Baines, but from WECA and from Heritage England. So that is already there. There's been 3 years worth of consultation, a lot of work by officers, probably something like 150 to 200,000 pounds worth of resource in terms of analysis, etc. And yet, and a lot of public consultation, which that is really, really important, rather than some of the very quick decisions that understandably you had to take. So can you explain why, after that significant expenditure, after the agreement by both WECA and Heritage England as to the plans, with the consultation and agreement of members or residents of Keynsham, that's now you're going to take a step back and review it. The first part of that regeneration was due to have gone in May of this year, and it hasn't. So can you explain why it was felt necessary to in effect waste £300,000 or thereabout of resource, money and time, and start again? Thank you.
Shall I take I can take the latter point first. I don't mind. So in terms of when I've said we're reviewing the funded programs, what we needed to make sure is that we could deliver those funded programs in the timescales set by those funding bodies. And certainly the WECA funding, there is a timescale on that. We have gone back to WECA and asked them to extend that funding. And actually the funding timescale to set. In fact, I had a meeting this morning with Highways and Public Realm discussing Keynsham amongst others. We haven't, the reason the work hasn't started is because we've been in lockdown. So unfortunately that work has stalled. And we are hoping that we can restart it again, as soon as practically possible. We've signed the agreements now with Heritage England, and there should be Historic England, sorry, and those announcements should be made in the next couple of weeks. So to draw down that money. But what they've asked us to do in light of COVID is to review our delivery plans to make sure we can still deliver what we said we would deliver, based on the fact that we've been in lockdown for so long, and that we can do what we said we wanted to do. So whilst I'm saying we're reviewing them, it doesn't mean to say that we're stopping them and not doing them. We just need to make sure we're in a position to move forward, so that all of our funding bodies are confident on that one. In terms of the question in relation to the tourism and 3 to 5 years, that came from my colleagues in Heritage Services, so I will have to check how they came to the 3 to 5 years. And this is my own assumption, but we have a lot of businesses from the Far East and we have a lot of businesses from the US, and I would imagine that the confidence in any of them travelling, certainly not at the moment, they can't travel to the UK, but that's going to take a while for that confidence to return, probably in the same way as our confidence in wanting to travel to China or to the Far East or to America at this time. It wouldn't be high on my agenda, and it's probably not high on their agenda. In terms of the consultation with the market towns, as I said earlier, unfortunately, we weren't able to do the consultation in the same way as we would have done previously. You know how the council works, and we go out to very long consultation periods. The Highways team were under a lot of pressure. They had to deliver Bath first, because that's where the higher footfall are, and officers worked as hard as they could to consult with the ward councillors. As I know, Chris may be able to add more to this, but from my understanding, we did not have time to consult with the businesses in the way that we would normally have wanted or liked to do. So apologies for that. In terms of Milsom Street, when we were determining the roads that we wanted to or needed to consider social distancing, Milsom Street is one of our main shopping centres. And we felt that it would be advantageous to close that all bar to buses, because it's quite a key route. And as you mentioned, the Park and Ride bus does come down Milsom Street. So we wanted to retain that, because also if we closed it completely with the Queen Square works that are going on, it wouldn't have been possible to achieve. And hence why, yes, it is a bit backwards, the horse before the cart, or whatever the saying is, but that's why it's so key now that we now pick up with the businesses and work with them. I've got a meeting on Wednesday with internal colleagues, but quickly after that I want to meet with those traders and have that further conversation on how we can support them, make Milsom Street, amongst others, look more attractive to people to want to visit.
So if I could ask Chris Major, Assistant Director for Highways and Transport, if he would like to feed into your question, Lisa. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. Lisa, thanks for the question. We were working at great speed to provide to members of the public social distancing to ensure safety within the areas. We had to work under emergency TROs, which have to be in place very quickly, and therefore we didn't have the ability to undertake consultation processes in the normal way. We did recognise that this did have some challenges, but we worked very closely with the town council and local members to try and come forward with a scheme that was acceptable. And the town council, as you know, were very supportive with the idea of closing the high street completely. So whilst we recognise it's not perfect, we are monitoring the scheme, and we are taking feedback from traders particularly, to ensure that we consider that as we go forward.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I was quite aware that you've had to work very hard to put all these measures in place to put people's health at safety first, and I realised it was difficult not to consult with traders as well. So I'm hoping, Lisa, that Chris has managed to answer your question.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I look forward to hearing all the feedback and how you feel the experiment has gone. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have Shelley on the list to speak.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a couple of, they're not really sort of questions as such, they're more sort of comments really. Just thinking as we go into autumn and winter, the problems with you know, people are quite happy queuing in the sun. We've had a nice spring and everything in summer. I just wondered if people will be quite so happy queuing in the rain outside various venues when it gets into some fairly inclement weather, and how we can sort of try and sort of, you know, encourage people still to do that. And I don't know, I don't have any answers really. And the second one really is just around the disabled parking facilities, in that because we've closed off some streets, they've obviously been taken away. And I think we've had a few emails in Western Ward from disabled residents, you know, concerned about coming into the centre and disabled, their usual place disappearing, and just really the need for ongoing comms around disabled parking facilities really. So they're not exactly questions, they're more just ongoing sort of concerns really.
Shelley, I think you have a very good point about when winter comes, and will people want to queue outside, or will they, you know, use their internet and order online? So yes, that's a very good point. But I didn't know if Chris wanted to come in onto the second part of your question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're very much aware of the impact that the removal of areas where disabled park have historically parked has on the community, with severe impacts on their ability to go about their day-to-day life. We really are aware of it. We've been meeting with the accessibility groups, representatives from the RNIB, from the wider accessibility groups, and we have further meetings planned to really talk through and understand from their perspective how changes impact on their movement around the city. Whilst we have taken away some areas, we are looking to place more disabled parking into the city, taking away some residents only parking to put it in, to really try and help out as much as we can, and also increasing the amount of blue badge parking within our car parks as well. It's a really difficult balance, it really is, but we're not unaware, and we're working with those who are directly impacted to try and come up with the best solutions we can as we go forward.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you.
Lovely. Dr. Kumar.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions, really, very quick one. Do we have any numbers of visitors which to Holborn Museum and Roman Baths, which opened on 4th of July and then 6th of July, compared to last year? Even an approximate percentage in a week terms, like, for example, 4th to 11th, or 6th to 13th in case of Roman Baths. And my second question is that I see that VAG and AR, basically Victoria Art Gallery and Assembly Rooms, they are going to be closed till March 2021. What makes we decide so early, perhaps, because things are moving rapidly, and even 3 hours ago, Oxford University has tested quite successfully about the vaccine, and the vaccine is that if taken, it induces WBC, white blood circles or something, and antibodies So why we are so early taking a decision like Cambridge University or Manchester University, who are doing all the courses online? So is not it a bit early assumption? Thank you.
I can perhaps pick this one up, Chair.
Okay, thanks, David.
I think alongside the Renewal Board, we also we have an internal recovery board. It's on the charts there, which is where we're looking at, what are the impacts of the whole incident on both our ability to open specific services, what are the financial implications. So when the decision to reopen the Roman bars was done, we had to make sure that we could financially afford to do that. And at the moment, we aren't able financially to afford to reopen the art gallery or the fashion museum. We don't have the resources in terms of staffing to run those in a safe, socially distanced way at the moment. Now, clearly, if Dr. Kumar, if things improve, then clearly that can be reviewed. But at the moment, that's the position that's been set around the opening of those dates. In terms of statistics, I'm sure we've got some coming through on the bars. I don't know about the Holborn Museum because we don't run that, but Linda might know more on that.
So David, just going back to the Fashion Museum, the Fashion Museum numbers of visitors is not as great as the Roman Bath. So obviously then to open up that and financially put staff there when we're not getting the numbers through is not financially viable, is it, at this stage?
Well, it's seeing in the overall context of our current position. So, as you know, the financial recovery plan that went to Cabinet a fortnight ago, we are, we have a massive gap in our income this year, and we've got to look at each of the decisions, both in terms of, not just the viability of opening it in terms of, public access and safety and the social distancing, but actually, does it make financial sense for us in the current climate to open it at this moment? So that at the moment, that's been the decision on those two operations. But if that improves, then clearly that can be reviewed.
So the Holborn Museum is not under Baines, but I do know somebody that volunteers there, and they are starting to get visitors from overseas back there in the last week or so. So. And they've had to close off several galleries as well, the smaller ones, and just really concentrate on the bigger ones so they can do the self-distancing there. So yeah, so we are getting some visitors from overseas again back to the city.
Chair, I can provide some figures for the Roman baths if you would like.
Yes, please, Linda.
So the week of reopening on the 6th of July, there were 3,700 visitors into the Roman baths, which was slightly above the target that we set. And in advance sales, we've sold, and I don't know when these people are coming. So this was of last week. There was 5,400 advance ticket sales. Now that could be more than one person because somebody's buying, buying one purchase, they might be buying 4 or 5 tickets. So as it stands at the moment, 10% of the advanced bookings have actually been from local residents, which is really interesting. Because normally local residents only make up 1 to 1.5% of the total number of visitors. So it's showing that people within Bath and North East Somerset, whilst I appreciate they don't pay to come into the baths, are coming in to their local attractions and rediscovering their areas. What I don't have, Dr. Kumar, is the comparator figures, but we can get those for you.
Sorry, Linda, can you just repeat how many visitors we've had to the Roman baths?
So in the first week of opening, so from Monday, the 6th of July, which seems like, and I get an update weekly, so I won't get last week's until tomorrow, unfortunately. But in the first week of opening, they had 3,700 visitors. Bearing in mind, they have to, they're operating at 30% capacity, not 100%, obviously, because they have to maintain the social distancing. It's online sales only, no walk-ups, no coach tours, and that, yeah.
I think that's still very good, actually, for a first week of opening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Lisa had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. David, could you just confirm, you say, and I understand why you're not opening the VA and the Fashion Museum, Where are the staff who are there normally employed by the VA and the Fashion Museum? How have they been redeployed?
I don't have the details with me. We can provide those for you, but certainly we had unless Linda does.
Yeah, I know the answer to
Linda
that
can
one.
do it. Linda can answer it. There we are. Well done.
Because normally what we would bring in over the summer is seasonal staff in the Roman baths. So we would recruit a lot of seasonal casuals in the Roman baths. So because the staff also need to maintain social distancing as well, so they have a rota system. So they bring in the staff that would normally be at the Fashion Museum and or the Victoria Art Gallery, and they are covering the Roman baths rather than employ additional staff for seasonal cover.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. So I think if everybody has... Oh, Sue, did you...
Yeah, I was on the list. Sorry.
Sorry, I missed you off, Sue.
That's all right.
My apologies.
All right, so I'll try and be quick. So I'm mindful of the time. We've got loads to cover. So thank you, Linda. Offer of a meeting would be absolutely wonderful for the city centre. Do you, I know they're not tourists, but nevertheless they're a large influx of people, cover the universities? Because this will make a huge difference to our nighttime economy in Bath. And I know that quite a lot of our pubs are struggling with capacity. Some of them haven't actually opened because they're struggling with capacity, some of the smaller ones. But I'm just, wondering about what will happen when they're full and the students are in town wanting to enjoy themselves and they can't get into anywhere. So that was the first one. I welcome the relaxation of legislation on tables and chairs, but can I just put a plea in to try and not have a free-for-all? Because we still need space on the pavement for pedestrians, especially where there are a lot of A-boards on pavements. It's good to hear you've got Cleo on board because this is bread and butter stuff for the public realm team, which used to be in. Yeah, and there's obviously there's an equality issue here if the pavements become too cluttered. And the other thing, which I do have a regular meeting with the public realm team, I did mention this to Cleo, is a plea for an online map while we're evolving here, showing where the blue badge parking and the loading bays are now, because I get a lot of queries and I have nowhere to go and look and get an answer for anyone. Thank you.
Sue, I think that's a very good point, and maybe on that mapping system that we could have the restaurants and cafes that do offer that outside service, so people know where they're going to go when they come into the city as well. So I don't know if Linda wanted to pick up.
Yeah, I can pick that up as a valid point. I think that the reason why we probably haven't produced one just yet is probably picking up on Chris's point, where we're trying to repurpose some of, maybe potentially some of the residence parking bays into blue badge bays, and some of the car parks to more provision for blue badge. So that's, and I know we're looking to put in some more loading bays. So I should imagine that's why we haven't done that. But I have a meeting tomorrow, so I will pick that up. The universities is a very valid one and an important one. And I know that one of the businesses, and sorry, I can't remember which, have already contacted the licensing team to make inquiries regarding that. But that is something that I probably do need to pick up with the universities and student unions themselves, as well as with Kath in licensing.
Linda, I think that the broader issue is we need a conversation with the universities about what their expectations are as well at the moment.
Yeah, how many of their students are coming back?
Are actually going to come at all?
Yeah.
Then a sense, then it's actually of those who come, are they going to use the businesses and the licensed premises, isn't it? So I think we'll have a discussion, I think, with universities about what their current expectations are.
Yeah.
So if I can just interject there, I have heard from, I think from the Vice-Chancellor, I'm not sure, of Bath University, that their figures are good. They're holding up. So I think we can expect a good.
Yeah.
But are they actually coming back in, or is it all virtual? I think that's what, Yeah. David, that's one for the economy
I'll pick that up Friday.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for everybody's comments, and that will be fed back to the cabinet. So when they discuss this, I don't think it's at this meeting tomorrow. I think it's later in the year, but thank you for your feedback on that. So we're now going to move on to livable neighbourhoods. So I'm going to again introduce Chris to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Much appreciated. I think, to be honest with you, the earlier speakers did a great job of introducing this item. I think we know what it's about. But just to give a quick overview, the strategies that have been presented to the panel designed to support the Council's long-term sustainable livable neighbourhoods strategies. I suppose the first question really is, why do we need the strategies? Well, in line with the administration's commitments, which we embedded into our corporate strategy, livable neighbourhoods provide a way for us to reallocate space, to enable active travel, and to really help deliver the outcomes from the climate emergency, where we recognise that we have to reduce mileage by approximately 25% per person to achieve carbon neutrality. The development of strategies really allow us to clearly align all of our necessary resources to the delivery of schemes. Without clear direction, the chances of success are greatly reduced, as we all know from project planning. Obviously, the first question that will come up is impact on current schemes. We recognise and reassure members that we're keen to continue to move forward with the current plan of works to make sure that they're delivered, and appreciate this will have some impacts on how we align the timings of works. But that work will go on in the background so that we can deliver this, the schemes on the ground as soon as we possibly can. The message really is that these types of schemes are now seen as a priority, and the development and ultimately the adoption of these strategies allow us to deliver those outcomes that people are looking for across the board. You know, we need to align resources. We need to make sure that we provide the buy-in across the council, make sure we've got clear objectives, with the ability to adjust those objectives for each community, because this is very personal schemes for different areas. But most of all, avoid the loss of momentum on the delivery programme as well. Obviously, I'm happy to accept any questions as they come forward, and also if you prefer to take it in writing, because I recognise there's an awful lot of pages and also an awful lot of information within the strategies we've presented. So happy to take questions as we go forward. Yeah.
So Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of the focus of low traffic neighbourhoods. I think my main concern is something that Shelley mentioned in terms of the social distancing, and I've got a particular worry about it. And that is about, it's the assumption that, yes, we want to encourage more people to walk and cycle. However, that implies that in order to reach the destination, they are, unless you've got Lycra man or Lycra lady, that they are fairly near their destination in terms of living. This again comes back to the development of restrictions in market towns and of course Bath. So the prioritisation, you said, prioritisation of our transport hierarchy is to focus on walking, cycling, micromobility and public transport and mass transport. However, that does discriminate against those not just full blue badge holders, but also those who don't have a blue badge, but are unable to walk for a distance, who can't or don't cycle, and also who live in rural areas and have to use the car. Now, I understand that your target in terms of development is focused on Bath primarily, and that makes sense. But how are we going to reconcile that in order by focusing on cycling and walking, that other members of our community are going to be discriminated against. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think what we're saying is, if you're able to move differently, you should do. That we should support that, that we should provide opportunity for people to be more active, to be able to cycle safely on the roads as well. But we're not saying you can't use a car. I don't think the policies are ever saying can't use the car. What we're saying is making sure that the car is used and on the right roads, in the right place, to the right destinations. These things are always going to be a balance. But car domination has happened for 50 years of transport policy. And we recognise that with all of the challenges we face, everything from the obesity crisis through to COVID, through to the fact that people don't have the social connectivity that they used to have across areas, that things need to change. Many people can cycle, including many with disabilities. We hear daily different groups coming forward, they can cycle, and many people can walk. I think as a society, we've got generally quite used to jumping in the car for short journeys. We recognise that from our data that 42% of the journeys within Bath are under 5 kilometres, which is eminently walkable or cyclable. And with the climate emergency and the challenges that we face, we need to start making different choices. It doesn't mean you can't use your car. What we're saying is use it for the right journeys in the right way to the right destination, rather than just continue as you have.
Thank you. Alison.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Hi. Yeah, really welcome the strategy. It's really good to see it. And I know it's been a while coming, so it's great to actually see something down on paper. And it's good to see the linkages, I think, between low traffic neighbourhoods, the residents parking strategy, and also electric vehicles. I think that's really important. In relation to the low traffic neighbourhoods, I welcome the bottom-up approach and the fact that local communities are going to be asked to generate ideas and proposals. But it's also absolutely essential that they are measured against an overarching strategy to ensure that all the different proposals work together well for the city or for whichever area they're in. And I think the criteria against which applications will be judged are vitally important and must be central to the consultation that takes place. So it will be good to see those. In relation to the residents' parking, I know in Widcombe there are some streets where for the last few years they've been working towards getting residents' parking zones in place on Perrymead, Lincoln Vale and Greenway Lane, and the expectation was that because the Beacon Occupancy Survey was done last year, this year will be the year when the scheme came into being. And I hope that the fact that there is this overall strategy and the timetable for adopting it isn't until November, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a delay on those schemes, because I think local residents who are desperate to have them, particularly I think following the implementation of the Bear Flat RPZ and the displacement of commuter parking that's had, I think it will be very difficult for them to accept a delay outside of this year on that. So I'd just like to make that point. And also in Bear Flat in particular, I think there are quite significant problems for businesses and for staff working in businesses, because it's very difficult for them to park. And I think in the past, when we had, regular buses coming down from the Park and Ride into Bear Flat, you could make the case that they needed to use the park and ride. But now that people are less likely to use buses, and also some bus services are not operating, and also for the businesses that stay open beyond the park and ride, so people can't get to their cars later in the evening, I think some provision should be made. So that's just a question really about how we cater for people who work in businesses and who need to park locally. So that's another question. And then just in relation to the EV charging, great to see a commitment to expanding EV charging. I know I got an electric car a couple of years ago, and I spoke to Mark Shelford prior to getting it, and he assured me that there would be EV charging points available locally about 2 years ago, and there hasn't been that provision. So I will really welcome it happening. And I think particularly the idea of using lampposts, I think it's really good that that is seen as a favoured option. But I do think we need a mixed economy. Not everybody can charge overnight. Some people need to charge during the day, and some people need to charge rapidly. So we'll need a mixture of rapid chargers and the slower chargers. And I suppose the other point just to make is that I'm slightly disappointed that there isn't more reference in here to electric vehicle car sharing clubs, because I think if we want to reduce car ownership, then that's a really important way forward. And I notice it's mentioned in appendices, but it's not in the main body of the document. And I wonder if more consideration should be given to that. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you, Alison. Number of questions there. Really pleased you're happy with the overall document. That's really really good. I'm pleased. There was a number of questions though. If I start with the car clubs, there are a number of references within that. Car clubs are also strongly referenced within our council's parking strategy, and we're greatly in favour. There is work ongoing to procure new suppliers of car club schemes and to really increase the amount of cars available within the city and the wider Baines area. So absolutely agree with you. This is a key deliverable for us. Workers are always a problem with residence parking, because one person's worker is another person's commuter who's blocking the parking area. And for the last 20 odd years, as I've put residence parking schemes into different areas of the country, all I generally hear is we want to stop everybody parking until we put the scheme in, and then they say, can we have some parking for this person that we didn't realise it would affect? It is always a balance, absolutely. And there are always going to be winners and losers with such a blunt tool as residence parking. I think that's why we're trying to look a little bit more strategically and not just default directly to residence parking as a solution. Low traffic neighbourhoods can help areas function around attractors, shops or schools, in a different way, as well as residence parking. So it can be a mixture of the two, and it can do it. But you're absolutely right. We need to give consideration, or at least be open to the impacts on certain groups as we put schemes into areas. I note your point around residence parking for certain areas, Lincoln Vale, for example. And as I said within my introduction, we are still committed to doing that work. We still have policies in place that are current to bring forward. We've lost the first third of the year through COVID. The teams have been focusing nothing but on social distancing schemes and things. So we are behind, without a doubt, from where we want to be. But we are continuing to work on those schemes and looking at the timelines for adoption and development of schemes. It may well be that they align before we get to formal consultation and processes anyway. So we do it, but we are still working on those schemes behind the scenes as we go forward. I think that was everything of your questions, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks. And just in relation to the business, the parking for people who work in the businesses, I do think that there are exceptional circumstances currently because of the reduction in public transport. So So I think, you know, maybe you need to look at it slightly differently.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, short term compared to the long term process. Yeah, absolutely. I note the issue. We are hopeful, you know, that public transport is coming back to run around about 80 or 90% of the pre-COVID levels. So there is public transport available, but we will consider the impact of COVID on schemes in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Tom?
Thanks, Karen. Chris, thanks very much indeed for this. I mean, whilst it was with some trepidation that I opened the pack of papers to start reading, as you made, you know, so I made my way through them. I thought these were really considered documents, and I was really, it was great to read. So thank you for that. And I know all the work that's gone into them, their production and their revision, even to get to this stage. I've got sort of 3 or 4 things, if that's okay, just to highlight. The first is, I would welcome just a very brief, I appreciate that the consultation is still being worked up, but I would appreciate just a very brief sort of summary of what exactly is sort of being consulted on in relation to these documents in the August window that you referred to. But then specifically on the papers, on the EV charging paper, look, it clearly highlights that we've got an enormous challenge ahead of us, and I said the paper to me raised more challenges than it did necessarily solutions, but I guess that's sort of the stage that we're at in this cycle. Just on the solution bit, though, I was surprised there were a couple of references, like in page 133, it talks quite a lot about the Oxford example, and it talks about the lampposts and home chargers using channels being the 2 highest scoring options in they did. But then there's a comment that says that Baines has apparently ruled out this last option, as it has in relation, which is the last option being home chargers using channels, because it has implementation and continued maintenance implications. And I guess I would just caution about us making conclusions, you know, to rule things out so early on in this cycle, especially if they were found to have been on the more successful end of the options in the Oxford scale, in the Oxford survey. The residence parking, I would really welcome just a comment on, there's a reference in the document that says that in page 107 that Baines is currently looking at its strategic vision and approach for on-street parking. And I would just welcome an understanding about when that's going to consultation or where we are in that, because in particular that included things I believe such as the CO2 based charging that came before this committee in January. So it'd be helpful to understand that. And finally, so I just got 2 points about the low traffic neighborhood paper, which I really enjoyed reading. And for me, the flow chart that is on page 79 made it all hang together for me, because then at least I could understand exactly what it is. And I would, my 2 points would be, one, I would absolutely echo what Alison said, which is that I think part of the consultation really needs to include the criteria by which each proposal that's received or developed by the council gets over these relevant hurdles. Because I can see a scenario where the council has a number of schemes coming forward and has to prioritise. But I think we need to be really transparent and clear about the criteria they're being assessed against, so that if one proceeds at a pace greater than another, residents understand why. And finally, on that one, is the point on page 69, which is about, there's this comment about the framework, the overarching framework for low traffic neighbourhoods. And it says that Baines has to develop a framework to identify potential areas which may be suitable for low traffic neighbourhoods. And my reading of that is that is sort of a precursor to everything, that has to be done even before a group can submit a application, because they need to fall within one of these areas that the council thinks might be suitable for a low traffic neighbourhood. And so I guess my question there is that framework and draft framework going to form part of the August consultation? Because it clearly seems to be something that's quite important for people to be able to feed back on. I'm sorry, there's a large set of papers, and I appreciate that's another 4 or 5 points arising.
Thank you, Tom. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head that it's an awful lot of papers, isn't it? There's a lot to go through there. So I'll try and go through your questions if I can in order. The first question about the consultation. What we are consulting on is the high-level strategic documents. Now, these set the direction of travel for the council. Once you set the direction of travel, you can start to align all of the resources internally and externally against those outcomes. So that's what we are consulting upon. We're developing a set of questions through the questionnaire and engagement processes to allow people to feed back within that. This doesn't say a scheme will go in X location, Y road. It will be like that. That's not the intention of these documents at all. The documents are quite clearly very high level to set the strategic direction and make sure that we can deliver schemes going forward over the short, medium and long term. So that's what we're planning on doing there. The second question you asked was about EV charging and why we've ruled out channels. I think for me, this is one of the reasons we've done the work we have. A number of authorities have been forced into making decisions and taking actions that perhaps over time they may end up having challenges with, and certainly digging channels into footways is a challenge for them for maintenance reasons. If people move house, you're left with a channel if it starts to break away because of weather and similar. That's why we took a more holistic approach, consulted across the maintenance teams, etc., asked them whether or not that was a problem for them, and then we're very clear to say that actually we don't think that is a suitable solution for us locally. So we've sort of ruled it out, but we couldn't write the document without at least considering what others had done. So that was the intention. If it doesn't read quite like that, then we need to improve the wording around that section. The third question, understand the timeline for changes. So I'm sorry, Tom, I'm just trying to refresh my mind on.
No, so that was just the reference in the residence parking zone paper that says that Baines is currently working on its vision and approach for on-street parking, and of which I guess the paper from Jacobs is something that contributes to our thinking on it. And it was just my question is about the timeline, about the publication, the consultation on that.
Sorry, that's my fault. When I put changes, I
that's right.
Yeah. So there is a number of changes to how we take forward permits and similar schemes that were due to be completed as part of a single member decision process earlier in the year. Due to COVID, that hasn't come forward because we are very conscious that making changes to how businesses and individuals function during this time could be challenging. So what happened is they sort of crossed back over, if I'm brutally honest with you, where the work was meant to have been completed, it hasn't been completed. The intention, as has been said publicly before, is that we will review all of our permit policies publicly and make the changes to those policies in the near future. There is no set timeline for that at this time. But it is a COVID impact, if I'm brutally honest with you. It's
that's fine. That's really helpful. Thanks.
And the last one, you picked on prioritisation. You're absolutely right. We've tried to set it out within section 4.2.7, where we've tried to set out what the prioritisation assessment would look like, how it fits, how an area fits within our strategic visions of what we're trying to achieve, the assessment of air quality issues, collision and seriously injured data, as well as vulnerable populations, including those indices of deprivation, because I think that's really key. The ability to link with existing travel routes and expedite public transport options, and then the sort of evidence of rat running, particularly significant volumes, speeds being an issue. Also then taking into account the likelihood of delivery based on public support. So we're asking local members to canvass and gain advocates within the community, because this has to be led with the community to make sure that any solution is acceptable. We then need to look at things like the technical feasibility of the solution, so whether or not it's actually achievable and deliverable, as well as assess the overall costs of schemes, because we have limited resource, and how we best use that resource is one of the considerations that we would need to give. And then timeframes, how quickly we could get the work. If it's a very small piece of work, could we bring it forward earlier? We then intend to put the schemes in front of the Cabinet for prioritisation, informed by public support. But the idea being that we will be very, very clear and open and transparent with the prioritisation list, so that people can see where it fits together, where the work will happen, how it will happen, but recognising the limited resource. So as more resource becomes available, as it will, as we align all of our resources within the council towards delivering these types of schemes, we'll be able to accelerate that programme of delivery.
That's really helpful. That's highlighting those as the criteria is brilliant. Thank you. And Chris, I'm sorry, just the very final question I had then was about the framework stage at the start in page. Can you just elaborate on that stage and its importance and how that's consulted on?
So I can't remember the exact wording off the top of my head, Tom, if I'm brutal.
Well, so the very start, on the Jacobs report on page 69, it says the very first stage is the Baines framework for low traffic neighbourhoods. And it says that Baines will develop a framework to identify potential areas which may be suitable for a low traffic neighbourhood, which suggests that you've got to fall into one of those areas before an application would be considered. And it's just to understand that stage of the process.
Yes. I think the inference from that work is more around recognising where the arterial routes run throughout the city and how that jigsaw fits together. And I am talking particularly about Bath here, but some of the issues still apply to the rural areas, the market towns, and similar. What we're talking about is, for example, it would be really difficult to deliver a low traffic neighbourhood that straddled an arterial route, for example. So what we need to do is identify within the framework of the arterial routes within the city, the best way that we can fit the jigsaw together, and that we can work with the communities and local members to start to develop how that framework comes together. What we also recognise is there can be risks at times by bringing forward a particular area without considering the effect of displacement of traffic or parking to other areas. So we just need to ensure that we are not making any decisions without considering within a framework how that might impact on the longer term decisions as well.
Okay.
So just to remind members, the recommendation is to review, consider and provide feedback on the draft policies prior to them being taken forward to public consultation, confirming if necessary any changes that should be incorporated, and the areas where the panel considers further work is necessary, And 2.2 is to note the timeline of, it's informal cabinet, then it's PDS, public consultation, review of the responses, then it will go to cabinet, then in November for a decision. So just to bear in mind, that's what we have to agree on this afternoon. So just a reminder. So I've got Grant next to speak.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the paper. It is quite thorough. I've just got a couple of questions I'd like to ask. So the first one is, how are we going to ensure that any negative economic impacts of this strategy on local businesses will be mitigated by an increase in footfall? And what evidence do we have to say that this is realistically going to happen? So that's just one. And the other thing, I'm not really sure if this is 100% relevant, but obviously we have to take into account local geography, and it's often difficult for residents, especially where I live, to change to cycling because we've got so many hills and so many valleys. I just wondered if there was going to be any sort of thing done alongside this to sort of help, because one way of overcoming it is through like electric bicycles, which obviously assist people with those sort of terrain issues. I just wondered whether the council would be doing anything to support residents, one that might not be able to afford it, or suggesting that this is another option they might not have explored. So that's just the two questions I wanted to ask.
Thank you for that. The issue for businesses is a challenge, isn't it? I think always the perception of how much trade is car generated compared to other means of transport can be a challenge for many retailers and businesses. Evidence nationally and internationally does tend to show that retailers particularly overestimate the amount of their customers who come by car compared to other means. However, that doesn't mean we should overlook their concerns at all, and we need to work with them to think about how we can best provide the types of schemes that hit the outcomes for everybody. Personally, we have seen through the visit by Councillor Lopes from Waltham Forest the impact that well-designed schemes can have on trade and business, and it can be really, really positive. The idea that people dwell in areas rather than being pushed to the sidelines by high volumes of traffic make the area much more attractive for people to come to. And once you start getting an idea that people want to come to an area, they will walk to it, they will find other ways to do it, they will increase it. And the majority of the evidence to date shows that where these schemes are implemented, overall footfalls increase. It also shows that people who walk, cycle and take public transport generally spend more than those who are car-borne because they have less options sometimes. So the short answer is we will work with those attractors to try and find the right solution. We'll also look to invest in other solutions and promotions that will help them as we build and develop this scheme. But this is really about a wider community and making sure that those community activists also respect and utilize the businesses within each area as we do it. There is no scheme at the moment for any particular area, so I can't give an example. But once we have a policy in place, we can really work with those individual businesses and try to find the best solutions. The second one is an interesting one for me, the geography. You're absolutely right. Some people can't cycle, and this isn't a cycling policy. This is an active travel policy. Active travel means walking, e-scooters, But it's also about social connectivity. It's about people dwelling in spaces. It's about stopping high volumes of traffic, driving through neighborhood areas and pushing people to the edges, you know, people with buggies on narrow pavements where you've got 4,000 cars a day driving through. But that doesn't mean that people won't have cars and won't use them. It may be that somebody who is in a motorized vehicle has to drive a couple of minutes further in the other direction before they can go. But if the journey's long, then that will have very little impact. If the journey's short, then realistically the question is, why are they driving it anyway? You know, that's the reality of it, isn't it? It's whether or not can we provide them with the infrastructure, with a community where they feel they could walk, cycle, scoot with other members of the community. So we're not saying don't have a car. We're not saying you can't take a car through. What we're saying is that you may have to go a slightly different direction. You may have to go a slightly different way in a motorized vehicle rather than cutting through the middle of a neighborhood, a community area where people might be wanting to dwell, socialize, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Shelley.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for all your very detailed, very well written report. It's just actually, I know we've touched on sort of public mass transport, but it does, the assumption does run right through this, that people will be using mass transport. And I just wondered if, I know it's partly been the government's been dissuading people from using public transport. And I know they're changing tack on this, but I think maybe locally as well, we need to maybe have more comms around, please use public transport, mass transport, it's safe. And especially for the elderly, for example, in Upper Western, the number 9 bus isn't running anymore. And there's some talk about rerouting the number 20, but I think there are concerns for people who obviously in hilly areas and they're elderly, they won't be able to walk or cycle. And you know, maybe they can be encouraged to use public transport again. And I know there are apps that show you how crowded a bus is, but if you're elderly, you're probably not going to be using those apps, and they may be, you know, nervous about using public transport and the distance involved there. So I think maybe just some comms around that really to encourage people to use mass transport again.
Thank you for that, Shelley. Yeah, absolutely right. We do know we're in unprecedented time with public transport. When we started writing these policies, you know, COVID was unheard of, and public transport was a really viable option for many people. We are very much aware of the national comms where the message has changed that, and government are now promoting the idea of public transport being safe again, and we will be working to develop messaging locally to align with that through our partners, WECA, West of England Combined Authority, you're responsible for it. So I'll take that away, absolutely. On the number 9 bus, yeah, we are working with WECA and First to try and find some solutions to maintain it. But again, it's one of those issues, isn't it? To support bus services, we need people to use them. If people don't use them, they disappear. Unfortunately, it's a commercial market in large parts. And it will remain a challenge. Hopefully, the work we do with low traffic neighbourhoods and residents parking will underpin public transport, where people can realise there are different ways to move around and to make them less dependent on cars for short journeys. And I do think it is very clear here. The message is, it's not all journeys, but particularly short journeys are the ones that have options to move in a different way for many people. Not everybody, and again, that's another message we'll give, it's not everybody. Some people will not be able to walk, cycle, scoot, but we can certainly help improve their overall community and lives by increasing that social connectivity as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you.
So I now have Sue.
Thank you. Right, so thank you for these documents. They're brilliant. I know a lot of work went into them. On the timeline, can I just really make the same plea you've heard before to not allow people who've been waiting a long time to have to wait a lot longer. I've got RPZs that have been waiting for a year to resume because they were put on hold. So, you know, I need to give these people some hope. So questions on the document then. Most of them have been answered. On RPZs, I know they're not very high tech or sexy, but can I just make a plea for paper permits? I know that they've been dismissed out of hand in the document, but it is mentioned several times how expensive it is that the enforcement officers are to be able to make sure that people are parking where they should be. If you've got a residence parking zone and there is something in the windscreen of a car, the residents will make sure that the people who are parked there are meant to be parking there. So that will take to some degree away the cost of an enforcement officer. And I don't think we should take away the current way of doing it because it does stop fraud, absolutely right. But I'd just like you to please reconsider whether paper permits have a role or not. And then the last one on the electric vehicle charging. This the document reads like it will primarily be demand-led by councillors. I just want to really make a plea for any way that we can expedite this work so that we can start small but get it going sooner, because 2030 is a long way away. And I think post-COVID, more people might consider now getting electric vehicles, especially with all the talk of green renewal. I got rid of my dirty diesel car at beginning of this year and replaced it with electric. It was really expensive. It was a hard decision. I live in a city centre on a main road. I can't charge the car at home at all. So it was a big decision, and I had been put off for quite some time about making that move because of the worry about charging my car. There are only 2 places in the city centre I can go to charge it. The lamppost thing, absolutely great. If you can leave it overnight, then that's good. But I just think we need to take a wider view and maybe go out to councillors and ask each of them, where do you think this could be done in your ward? I mean, I can think of places where we've got on-street parking where you could put a fast charge faster than overnight. And I agree with what somebody said before, we need a mix. I can think of small car parks like one Broomhays residential parking where we could have one in there. Could we consider that where there are charges in places where there's residential parking, until we beef up the capacity that we've got, that anybody with a parking permit in the city of Bath could use one of those to charge their cars rather than being scattered around and restricted to that zone particularly. So the biggest plea is to try and expedite it to bring this forward, because I think the very thing that will make people switch to electric vehicles if they really do need a car is to take that worry away, and they know that they can see spaces there, they can see them available on the road, they can see that they're going to be able to take their car somewhere to charge it, which I couldn't when I did my switch. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. As we touched on before, we are continuing to work on the RPZ work in the background. The delivery of the Livable Neighbours strategy allows us to access more funding to start accelerating programs going forward as well. So we absolutely hear the plea on that. Second point about paper permits. Paper permits are really difficult to manage, to maintain, to administer. It takes away a lot of the benefits of digital permits, of being able to swap vehicles and to ensure that people are not fraudulently using them by linking to council tax records and similar. So whilst there is a small saving on the ground with residents reporting where people don't do it, usually what happens is you get the report and you go there and it's somebody who's forgotten to display their bit of paper, or it's fallen off or something anyway. So my guys still have to go there and do the work to be able to issue any type of penalty for it. So whilst I understand, I think it would be really challenging for us to move back to a paper-based solution now. EV charging, I hear you're pleased for the work, and I'll take those points away. We have a number of new bays coming forward as part of the Go Ultra Low program, including charges in places such as Cleveland Road car park, Lark Hall car park. We have a number of taxi only rapid charges that are being installed to help that industry as well. So there is some work, but I take away the plea for further work. And that's really why we linked it to the low traffic neighborhood and residence parking strategies as well, because the delivery within the residential neighborhood areas is really the next stage. It is a really difficult one for us to understand. You know, we don't deliver petrol stations as a council. We've never done that sort of thing, and now we're having to get into an area where we're not the experts and learn and work through with the power suppliers at WPD who do the network to try and find some solutions. So there is an awful lot of work to do, but I'll take away those pleas.
Thank you.
So Joel.
Thanks very much. I'll try and be quick. I think broadly, I was really felt very positive about all the documents, and I thought they were really positive. And in many ways, particularly around low traffic neighbourhoods and EV, it can't happen fast enough for me, really. And so to try and move forward the bureaucracy and to try and streamline the processes to kind of move to actually put something in place, I would be really keen to try and move forward, even if we could have some exemplar or pilot sites to kind of give people the opportunity to kind of feel it and see it and experience it, would be a real step forward. I particularly wanted to focus, well, the one comment I was going to make about the LTNs is that I think as somebody who's a sort of a small time cyclist rather than a mad cyclist, my sense is it's all about making the streets feel safer as a cyclist, and that some of the journeys, even if they're quite small, so I live at the top of Rush Hill in Odddown, just going across the St. Martin's, if you go on the main road, it's scary, you don't feel safe, it's not a nice experience. So I see this as a real game changer in creating infrastructure which makes people feel safe going on two wheels or walking in areas that are previously unpleasant to do because of just the volume of traffic or the nature of the traffic. So it's making it a pleasure that I think will then almost drag people out. It's much more fun to go cycle to the shop if it's you're not having to navigate horrendous traffic problems. So yeah, I think that element of changing the whole feel of our streets is what the big game will be, and it will then drive people into actually seeing the joy of going on a bicycle rather than it just being a kind of a getting from A to B. In terms of the main focus I wanted to kind of pick up on was really the EV points. And so I too have got an electric vehicle, and I guess there's a frustration at the moment with Bath that even when we do have EV charging points, so Charlotte Street is maybe a good example, the pace of then getting, when they fall into not working, the pace of getting to be fixed seems to be very slow. So they were out of action for quite a long time in Charlotte Street, which was just frustrating, and you could see that people were getting fed up with it, really. So I think if we're going to make that commitment, we also have to make the commitment to kind of make sure that we're using our levers with whoever our suppliers are to get them maintained and fixed. I had actually a similar frustration on the way down to Devon when we were away last week and drove into a service station and the system was down and you had to go another 20, 30 miles to get charged up. In terms of then the big question I've got around the EV is the issue about the grid, and whether I understand there's been debate about whether there's an opportunity for councils to take control of their local grid and to kind of then generate by then sticking solar panels on top of the park and rides, and to be able to actually use the local grid to actually drive down the costs for residents and generate as well. So I don't know whether there's a broader piece around, is our grid fit for purpose? And by investing in it or taking more ownership of our local grid, does that provide greater opportunities to expand that change? Because it's definitely coming. and we know that the government direction of travel is getting rid of petrol cars altogether. So it's how do we get on the sort of the top end of that curve, really? I'd like to see more availability in the park and rides, and I'd like to come back to almost the point that was made right at the beginning of the meeting by Amanda about our taxis, whether can we even go one step further and almost decide through licensing route that actually we only want electric taxis in our main cities and towns, and create the infrastructure so that then we only license electric vehicles for taxiing and the like, right, and to drive the change almost by putting the infrastructure in place and say actually we don't want petrol or diesel taxis. So I think those are the key points I wanted to make. So thank you, and thank you for the documents.
Thank you, Joel. That's great. I think you're absolutely right to pick up changing the feel of the streets as cyclists and pedestrians. Really, the low traffic neighbourhood is designed to allow those journeys to be pleasant. I think we've all seen during lockdown the difference in the numbers of people cycling and walking when the levels of traffic were greatly reduced, particularly off the main roads. Time and time again, we saw families out taking exercise and similar, and commuters cycling for the first time to locations they would never have dreamt of before. So you're absolutely right. Building a network of low traffic neighbourhoods gives us the opportunity to build infrastructure, linked infrastructure that allows people to cycle, walk, take different choices going forward. I note your point about the electric charger points and the frustrations of being out of order. Really do. Crossovers of contracts, historic contracts, into new contracts in new areas. The historic points were paid for by European funding that ran out, and we have to move to a more commercial model. You know, we can't continue to give away electricity and maintain free of charge bays. So we did need to look at the model and how that comes forward, and that has been undertaken as part of the Go Ultra Low project, which will see more bays implemented over the coming period of time, and will continue going beyond that. You did touch on very clearly on the investment in the grid. I'm really not the expert on that question at all. The small bit I can mention is I do know that we are looking actively at, again, at bringing solar panels into the park and ride sites and generating back into the grid. But my colleague Jane Wildblood would be able to give you a much better overview of what our approach would be, and perhaps we'll make sure that she can give a brief update on what we're doing around that. I'm sure there's probably plenty published, if I'm brutally honest with you, but we'll make sure she gets in contact and gives that information, as I'm not the expert at all. But it does link into that availability in the park and rides. You're absolutely right. The more bays we provide, the more people will use them. There is always that draw, isn't there? You feel more confident to do it, and people will get used to how they work as the range increases as well. People feel more confident. Certainly, you know, even personally, I'm looking at them and going, 200 miles, is that enough range for where I go? And these days, the furthest our car goes is to my wife's work, which is 11 miles. I don't know why I feel I've got to charge every single day, twice a day, to have an electric vehicle. But it is that whole point, isn't it? Making sure that people feel they can make the switch and feel confident. The last point you touched on, taxi licensing. Our licensing policy does not allow us to require electric only vehicles at this time. But there are quite stringent emission standards coming in line with the Clean Air Zone. So all taxis will be Euro 6 compliant. And that does reduce the emissions from them significantly. I'm led to believe by my colleagues in licensing that we do have our first fully electric taxi. It's a Tesla, I believe. So we do have somebody already moving towards it. And as we put the taxi rapid charging points in the city, that will get further interest, I'm sure.
Dr. Kumar.
Thank you. I'm just a couple of quick points, and I also apologize for going out for 2 minutes to speak with my son, so I might have missed a couple of points. So if my question has been already discussed, then my sincere apology in advance. I was thinking about this electric vehicles, and in some of the localities, even if like I have a house, but I cannot charge, and that's why I have not bought, because on the street, we cannot do it because there are so many cars, and if with the electric pole, if we are allowed, then other residents or other neighbors, there's no designated parking, but there are many places, for example, in my ward here, where there is parking place for the residents, and if in those parking places, they are huge, some places, if there could be charging for the electric vehicles, then residents would be more encouraged to buy the electric vehicles. And my number 2 question, which is a very quick one as well, I've seen the Jacob reports, and it says, and I can go again, that there is an appendix C on the last page 165, which says that on the electric vehicle on a street charging point to request perform a template for the councillors. But the whole page is blank. So do we have to write something? And I would later on, of course, I would like to learn how to complete this this application or performa. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for that. That's great. I think you picked up a key point with the on-street EV charging and the challenges we face with so many vehicles, and the idea there's been no designated bays. Whenever you put in infrastructure like this, even if you open it up for the public, it may get adopted by early adopters of the technology, and they start to think that it becomes their bay. And that is a challenge that we face when we work through delivery of these schemes. Certainly we've seen it in other cities where neighbourhood disputes have broken out around ownership of bays, particularly somebody comes home from work, needs to charge before they go the following day, and some other member of the public's parked there, and all sorts of things. So we do need to think clearly and try to work with communities as we're developing the infrastructure to make sure they know what the rules are. The second point around the pro forma, yeah, absolutely. This is still a work in progress. We've presented to you the draft policies, and the pro formas are still being drafted behind the scene. The idea was we wanted to get clear steer from yourselves as the PDS panel for this subject, so that we could make sure that it's in the best possible format to go forward to the public. So where we have to do pro formas, they are being delivered to me as we speak, and they will be ready before we launch with the public consultation as we go forward. But it is just a case of making sure that people have access to it, make sure that they can fill it in and complete it and give us the information, because that's the key, isn't it, for the pro forma? It's collecting the information to make sure that we can make the right decisions about where we install bays.
So Chris, I have a few points I wanted to raise as well. It's the high street. This is towns and villages, and how do we support our commercial shops, businesses to stay? How can Bains encourage them, which then will reduce the travel for essential goods to supermarkets for food, and then it stops the home delivery services as well. So that's just one point really. How do we support our high street? So the residents parking scheme is priority to permanent residents over commuters and visitors to the area. I'm very keen to see commuters and visitors to use the parking ride. but I think it's also very essential that there is off-street parking for residents and contractors to use. So that was number 2. And do we feel that the timescale for the adoption of the schemes is sufficient? Start with this week. So so I just wanted to go to car ownerships and the neighbourhood. So we've talked about where you can pedestrianise areas, so and then people commute around that. So, but with people that live in those pedestrianised areas, it stops them from the use of their own cars. You know, it stops them from travelling into the countryside. They may not be able to use public transport and trains because they don't take them to where they want to go. So I just wanted to be mindful that, you know, car ownership reduction, you know, may have a knock-on effect on some residents as well. So I agree with early engagement is necessary to engage with residents about low traffic neighbourhoods, reducing the rat running and inappropriate routing of HGVs. So vision and objectives really is, and this is in the light of COVID-19, and I know we want people to walk and cycle and use public transport, but at the moment people are frightened to use public transport, and I just wanted to raise that because it was in the report. On-street electric charging, you've mentioned Bobster and Babington. Neither of these are in Baines, okay, in your report. You said Stone Easton Hotel is in Radstock, but in fact it's in Stone Easton. Okay, so I think you need to get these areas correct. Okay, and you've also got Old Parsonage, it's a guest house, but this is it open to the members of the public for charging their cars, or is this just residents only? So my couple of more things, sorry. So the EV charging sites are they working in conjunction with the residents' parking schemes? So the criteria for residents' parking, as this will have an effect where EV charging sites can be located in certain areas. So obviously you've got resident parking, we're going to have EV charging, so they might displace people to park other places. So that was really it. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate that. If I go down the list as I've tried to make notes as we were going through, how can Baines support rural areas, businesses within rural areas, and support our high street? There's a number of streams of work to look at this very thing. As you know, part of the renewal piece that David and Linda presented earlier was about this, the whole idea of how we support the high street. This particular piece of work helps support local businesses by making them attractive within an area, to try and bring people to dwell within the area, to use the shops and facilities they have. But there is an awful lot of other support that's probably outside of this policy, and perhaps it'd be easier to come back to you on the list of works we're doing to support and love the high street schemes in rural areas particularly, if that's okay. We touched on the RPZs and the fact that commuters should use park and ride, and that absolutely agree. You know, commuting, I completely agree they should use it. Although we do note quite strongly that realistically it would be better if they didn't get in their car at all and they perhaps used bus from destination or cycle from destination rather than use it, because park and rides can be an attractor for vehicles. Although saying that, we'd still prefer the vehicles parked on the outskirts of the city rather than driving into the centre. So we note those points, absolutely. You mentioned the timelines.
Yeah.
Yes, they are challenging. I'm really, really challenging, if I'm brutally honest with you. But I think that's what we're saying within this, that we're looking to align all of our resources to this priority, to these priorities within it. This is a a priority of the administration embedded within the council's corporate strategy, and we are developing overarching strategies that give us the ability to bring more resource and align it to the delivery of these schemes. People have been crying out for these types of schemes for a long time, and we are working really hard, and my team are being pushed to the limit to bring this forward as quickly as possible. We could be circumspect, we could say it will take us longer, but we want to be ambitious, and our cabinet member particularly, who I'm sure is still listening, wants us to be really ambitious on the delivery of this, and we are trying to make sure that we can get moving, access as much funding as we possibly can to bring these schemes to fruition. The low traffic neighbourhoods stopping people using their own car. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting perspective that I hadn't perhaps considered fully. Our opinion, as I said earlier to Grant, Councillor Johnson, was that actually we're not telling people you can't use your car within a low traffic neighbourhood. All that we do perhaps is cut off the direct routes, the rat running types of solutions, so that people have to go on more suitable roads. And I know that one of the members of the public did raise some issues around what's classed as a suitable road within Bath. Absolutely right. There is really no suitable roads, are they, that, you know, they've developed organically over time. But we would all say that if you needed to use your car, you're not going to be trapped. You're not within an area. You may just have to drive slightly longer to go onto an A road, an arterial route, to get to where you need to go. So if we can discourage people using their cars for short journey, then actually we've achieved the outcome. Air quality improves, congestion reduces, road safety improves for those who aren't in a car, all of those things which we're trying to approach and achieve from the outcome of this. But that doesn't stop anybody driving sensibly within the speed limit if they need to. I take the point about early engagement is required.
Yeah.
Critical, absolutely critical. That's why we've developed the schemes for to be led by local members and advocates within each area. We always hear a lot of loud voices on both sides of the argument about how we deliver schemes. Everybody's got a view on traffic and transport and the impacts it's going to have, which is why it's absolutely critical that we do it. However, a viewpoint isn't necessarily a veto. You know, it's about finding the right scheme that can do it. It doesn't mean that you want to drive your vehicle through a middle of a residential area because you always have to, or because it's the most direct route. It doesn't give you a veto over the needs of those who perhaps don't have cars, those who in the hard to reach groups, be that disabled or minority groups, etc., whose voices are less heard generally. You know, we're very clear that we want to hear from all sections of the community as we take these schemes forward, and utilising local members to be that conduit for that information. Public transport, you touched on the fact that people have been told not to. Agreed. The messages have been challenging, without a doubt. But I think we are moving away from it. The national comms is changing as we speak to start to say it, and the numbers of people who can use buses safely have increased to about 50% of previous loadings. So there is some positive. I'm not positive, perhaps. There is a movement towards a recognition that the use of public transport can be safe and managed. You then touched on the EV areas and making sure that they're working in harmony with residence parking and other schemes. You're absolutely right. It needs to work in harmony across the piece. That's why we've brought together a suite of documents. We're not there yet. This is the high level strategy. The detailed design schemes is a completely separate piece of work, which we bring forward in light of adoption of strategies. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. So thank you, Chris, for your time today. And I'm hoping everybody will find all your answers very, good, because yeah, it's a big piece of work and you've got a lot to do. So thank you very much. So we're just now moving on to our very last piece, and that is the panel's work plan. I hope everybody had a chance to look at this. So on our next meeting, which is in September, yeah, we're looking at the strategy for tree planting in Baines. So there will be more things coming forward over the next few months. So if anybody has got any things that they would like to put on the forward plan, please let Donna, myself and Michaela know. So thank you everybody for this evening, and thank you for everybody who's been watching. I apologise about my Wi-Fi at the very beginning, but thank goodness I've got a really good vice chair who stood in there then. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate that.
Welcome. Thank you.
And I will see you all again soon. Have a good evening.